So now we're going to move on to the next talk, which is also an amazing story of how you become an international brand. I say that Latin America has many talents and also many tastemakers. And you're going to be introduced to one of them who's made his brand a household name. He's from Colombia, proudly so. And this is going to be an amazing chat because it's going to be moderated by a fashion journalist with an impressive trajectory and career. So let me introduce you to Bridget Foley and Mr. Edgardo Osorio. Big round of applause, please.
Thank you so much for being here. It is such a delight. It's a joy for me to be here with all of you and with you, Edgardo. Before we get started, which I'm really excited to do, let's take a look at this video.
My name is Edgardo Osorio, and I'm the creative director of Aquazzura. I was born in Cartagena, Colombia, but I was raised between Barranquilla, Miami, and London. Ever since I can remember, I've always been in love with fashion. I also grew up surrounded by women. In my family, my mother has 5 sisters and they all loved fashion. They all particularly loved shoes. That really had a huge influence on me. I had the opportunity to move to Italy to work with Italian luxury houses when I was just 19, and that's when my career really took off. When I arrived to Tuscany, I felt a connection that I had never felt before. The idea behind Aquazzura was born in a summer after I attended 11 weddings. I started noticing that women often were complaining about their shoes and their feet. This was something that really caught my attention. For me, comfort is an intrinsic part of the DNA of Aquazzura, that it's part of my design process, and it's the whole reason I started the brand. You shouldn't have to sacrifice beauty for comfort. While sitting at the terrace of my favorite hotel, which is the JK Place, looking at Mount Vesuvius into those beautiful blue waters of the Mediterranean, I realized I wanted to dedicate my brand to Italy. The pineapple is not only a symbol of hospitality, but gold pineapples are also lucky charms. That's why I love the idea of having a lucky charm on the bottom of your shoe every day. I wanted everything that has to do with Aquazzura to be about positivity, about celebrating life, and about bringing joy to the customer. Shoes are only the beginning of this wonderful adventure that will hopefully become a lifestyle brand.
Edgardo, that is beautiful. Can you hear me? Okay, that is a beautiful video and touches on much of what I want to talk about. But first, when we spoke last week, you said something that really stuck with me. You said that if you're not sure of your own Coca-Cola, no one's going to buy it. I think that says so much to creatives who aspire to a career. Discuss.
Well, can anybody hear me? Yes, okay. For me, you have to have a vision. You need to know, as a creative, when you're starting a brand, when you're selling something, you need to be absolutely sure of what you represent, who you are, who you want to show, what you want to be. You know, when you're starting something, you need to have such a clear, razor-sharp vision of everything you want. I really believe boards and mood boards and vision boards are absolutely necessary. You need to imagine how your stores are going to look like, who your clients are going to be, who do you want to dress, which I used to do. I used to really sit and think like, how is my bag going to be, and how do I want my shop, and where would I like my shop, where do I want to sell, everything. You need to have such a clear vision because you are going to have to sell that to the world. You have to believe it, and it needs to be something that represents you. It needs to be something that's really you, it's a really tough exercise because you have to dig deep into your soul and say, what am I about? What a part of myself do I want to show to the world, the best part of myself, or something that moves you? And this thing that moves you inside, you need to be able to sell it to someone else. So you need to drink your own Coca-Cola first and then sell it to someone else, because otherwise, if you don't believe in your own dream, if you don't think that it's the only vision, that it's absolutely right, who else is going to buy your things? And I remember the first season, I started my brand. I went to, we had no money, and we went to my friend's, we borrowed her living room in Soho. We started calling everyone and calling friends, asking people who know somebody at Saks, who knows somebody at Bergdorf's. Does anybody know somebody at Vogue? And one by one, we kind of started to see. But it was also really making sure that we knew exactly what we want, where we wanted to go, and knowing exactly who you wanted to sell. And one of my first clients, I sold her the collection, actually 2 of them, without seeing the shoes. I met them, I told them my life story, and after I told them what the brand was about, they bought they're like, we want to buy your collection, even though we haven't even seen the shoes. That's how much you need to believe in your story.
Your life story is so interesting. You talk in the video about Italy, and you had said to me that you wanted to make a brand that will do for Italy what Ralph Lauren did, how Ralph Lauren expresses America. Where does the Latin come in? You're from Colombia, and you're raised between Colombia and Miami. You spent a lot of time here, right? So where does the Latin come in the brand?
Well, for me, I mean, the Latin side, I think you are all your experiences and everything, where you travel, where you are, where you grew up, and the people you meet. As a designer, you're a sponge to everything. I think there's a word that I love, alegría, and I think la alegría latina, and that happiness, that joy for life, that joy for color, that love, and also that love for women, because I grew up, again, like I said, surrounded by women, and I've always loved women, and that is something very Latin. I'm a very family person, and I grew up around women who love to take care of themselves, who love to wear high heels, who love to look their best, and it's a very Latin thing, and I think that is something that I always proudly carry with me. The anecdote of me going to 12 weddings, I love to dance, and it always, some of my best ideas and some of the things came from just being observant to women. So in that case, I kept noticing, women were wearing very expensive shoes, going to these weddings, and one thing is if you arrive to a party and after 3 hours that you're dancing, your feet may hurt. Another thing is if you arrive to a party and 40 minutes later you want to go home because your feet hurt. And I thought, well, there's maybe an opportunity here to make comfort mixed with beauty. And that is something that I took advantage of.
With the beautiful shoes that you do, and you do stilettos, you do very elegant, you do very sexy shoes, what is it in the construction that adds the comfort?
It's many things. So I was, through my different experiences working in Italy, because I arrived to Italy at 19 and I started my company at 25. And during those years, I had the opportunity to meet amazing people, work with incredible artisans. And one of them was this man that actually one of my factories recommended. He was a technician. I needed someone to help me because I had this idea. I wanted to make very comfortable, sexy shoes. He had been studying the foot and the form for over 35 years. And together, it took us over a year to figure out a way for the shoe to be constructed so that it was lighter, it was more ergonomic, so that the weight of your foot wouldn't only be if you're wearing a heel, or the weight of your body normally goes to the ball of your feet. The way we constructed the shoes, it would be more evenly distributed between the arch and the back. But it's also a part of the design process. It's surprisingly not a lot of designers. Sometimes you go into a store and you see a beautiful shoe or something beautiful and you try it on and you're like, somehow it doesn't really work. And it's because maybe that designer didn't really intend that shoe to be anything more than an object. For me, half the times I design something and I completely change it on the woman's foot. I cut it up. I do kind of a paper mache situation on the model's foot. I make them walk. If I'm not sure about something, I'll make them wear them for a month and try it on to see if it hurts. And I go through endless fit trials. It's part of the design process, because for me, part of the luxury of buying one of my shoes is not the fact that only they're made in beautiful materials in Tuscany, not only in Italy and Tuscany, but also that this designer paid attention to you, to your comfort, to how you're going to feel, to is it going to make my legs look long? Am I going to look good? Am I going to be able to walk in this? Am I going to be able to dance in this? Does that strap make you cut your ankle, or does it make your ankle look thinner? All these things that I learned also being observant through the years.
I want to go to your backstory a little bit. We have, in sort of as concise a way as possible. Your story sounds to me almost like a latter day or a modern Renaissance apprenticeship. You started working very young. You had found a mentor when you were a baby. I mean, you were 14 or 15 years old, right? And you found a mentor in Colombia, and then you went to Europe. So talk about the concept of hands-on work at a young age.
Well, for me, it's one of life's ultimate privileges if you're able to discover what you love and what drives you and moves you from a very young age. I have friends who are in sports or who play instruments, and they start when they're 5 or 6. And so
I love that comparison.
And I think the more you practice and the more you obsess over something, obviously the more you can learn. And for me, I knew I wanted to be in fashion, and from probably when I was 10. And I convinced my parents to send me to London to a school when I was 14 to do a summer school. I came back, I found...
St. Martin's, right?
St. Martin's, yes. And then I came back, I did an internship with the designer whom her daughter went to my school, Francesca Miranda, who's from Salvador, but she's based in Colombia. And I started my work there, and I learned with her. She took me to Europe. She took me under her wing. I was able to go to Paris to the fairs, to Milan to the fairs, and I learned a lot. Then I went to London. I continued my studies while I continued to consult with her, and I started consulting for other people. And during all these journeys, then I found somebody that worked at Ferragamo who offered me a job, and then I moved to Italy.
You worked for Ferragamo. You also worked for Roberto Cavalli.
Yes.
And someone else.
Rene Calvilla in Venice.
What did you learn? Ferragamo to Roberto Cavalli, that's sort of, A to Z. So and then you told me also that you were doing a consultancy and working with clients in Russia and in Hong Kong. And so what did you learn from this broad overview? Or would you consider it a broad overview?
I mean, it was fascinating because in the beginning, what could have, Ferragamo, because I was Colombian, they couldn't get me a work visa. I had a study visa. They were able only to hire me as a consultant, which in the end worked in my favor because when I was 19, I founded a consultancy company, and I started always having one luxury client, and then I worked with maybe more mainstream, maybe a chain of stores in Russia or a chain of stores in Australia, clients from all over the world, and I ended up having the opportunity to travel, and I worked in Indonesia in factories where people were embroidering things all over Bali, working in the most modern facilities in China, working in Spain, working in Italy. Working in luxury was wonderful because in all these, in Ferragamo, you learned the way shoes are beautifully made, the traditional method, and so much about the
Let me interrupt you just for a second. Growing up, you knew you wanted to work in a discipline that would deliver beauty to people.
Yes.
But how did you and when you were drawn to the fashion world, how did you focus away from clothing and onto shoes?
Well, by actually doing this internship, I think within a week that I was working with Francesca, I realized that she was doing ready-to-wear, and I realized that ready-to-wear wasn't for me, that I was actually more interested in the accessories. When I was already at the school, some of the teachers had told me, they were pointing out to me, actually, your accessories are interesting, you should focus on that. And it's something that just naturally developed, and I think that's one of the beauties of working with someone else, and of starting young, because you're able to understand maybe what you thought initially was going to be. Fashion is a very broad. It can be anything. It can be buying. It can be merchandising. It can be being a designer. It can be many, many things. And for me, and you can design watches, you can design shoes, you can design so many different things. So for me, I was able, because of that, because I started young, and because I did these internships, to focus in accessories.
You said you launched the company at 23 or 25?
25.
25. That's young, but still you had worked for for quite a few people in a very serious way. I know that Tom Ford so many young designers want to get out of school and launch a brand immediately. You went a different route. Tom Ford is another one who says that he advises people to go work for someone else first, preferably in Europe. Do you agree with that?
I agree with him 100%, because fashion is something where you have to have the connections. You have to have. It's difficult to start your own company when you have all the suppliers in the world. You can go to Premier Vision in Paris, and there's 5,000 suppliers. Which one are the right ones? Which ones are the right artisans? It's all about also connections. So you need to, through all these years, you find who the best people for leather, who the best people for fabrics, who are the best people for embroideries. You start having a relationship with those people, and you also make a lot of mistakes and learn from your own mistakes and mistakes other people are making in the process. And in Europe, you're able to see so much of the technique and the craftsmanship and these incredible, really what luxury is all about.
While making the contacts.
While making the contacts on someone else's, and learning so much while someone else is paying you. You don't do this. It's very hard to do this on your own, and it's vital that you actually have this experience working for someone else. Anywhere, if you have the privilege to do it in Europe, wonderful. Having that, being able to work from someone else, you're always going to make mistakes, but you can. It's so important, I think, to make those mistakes early on, also with someone else,
and to discover sort of what your own ideas are. One of the things that you learned about yourself, at a very young age, you were at Roberto Cavalli and you were backstage at fashion shows with Naomi and Kate Moss.
I can add something before I was, if I can add something, if you work in luxury and you want to work in Italy or in France, everyone that makes luxury fashion is a small and medium-sized company. They're all family companies, and you may have all the money in the world. If they don't know you, or you have no money.
You're talking about the suppliers, the people
the
you
suppliers,
go to.
If you want to,
the people that Louis Vuitton goes to.
The first people
yes.
that you need to, if you want to start a fashion company, you need whoever makes whatever you're making. Mm-hmm. You can dream all you want, but if you don't have the right factory to make it, it's very difficult. And when I started, I was able to knock on the door of people who knew me, who knew my work ethic, who knew me personally, who knew how I was. And they gave me a chance. And sometimes they would go to me and say, we like you. You may not make the volumes of Prada and Jimmy Choo, but we're making your samples first because you're great. And this makes the world of a difference. If they don't know you, it's very difficult.
That is so interesting, because I've spoken with so many designers over the years, and people don't stress enough the relationship factor.
Relationships are key.
It's really key. So what I was going to say, that when you were at Roberto Cavalli, you were at fashion shows and seeing the models and seeing people like Pat McGrath, but you decided that fashion shows are not for you.
Well, I love fashion shows, and I think, don't get me wrong, I think the pandemic showed that fashion shows, they were virtual for a while, and they went immediately back to the way it was, because they actually do make a difference. But I think when you do accessories, when you do accessories, you don't necessarily need to do shows. I don't think it's the best way to impact. I think when you make clothes, it's different. But I also am a firm believer in doing, less things done really well. If you're a young designer or if you're a young brand and you can't afford to make 4 good shows a year, make one thing that really makes a difference and do it well and do something that people will remember. I think there's too much noise and there's too many brands. And so unless you make something that people will remember, it can be, I always think when you have the most limited budget and you have to get the most creative, but that's when really great ideas can come out, and you can get people to support you, and you can get sponsors, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you have to make it interesting.
I would love to, where does the time go? Our time is almost up because I would love to open the floor to questions. So I want to ask you two more things. You started 11 years ago, correct? I think last year you launched Casa, and this year handbags. Talk about that order, because I would think that it seems that shoes and handbags would have been the more natural progression. And does the Casa suggest that you have lifestyle ambitions?
Well, that was exactly the point. I mean, it would have been obvious. It was a choice. I personally did it for two reasons. One, because I fundamentally believe that the future of luxury is lifestyle, and it's, the future will be you're gonna arrive to an Aquazzura hotel, and you'll be in Aquazzura sheets, and you'll be wearing an Aquazzura perfume, Aquazzura beauty, Aquazzura eyewear. You can imagine a whole lifestyle, and we're really going in that direction if you're starting to see the beach clubs that brands are doing, and restaurants and pop-ups and cafes, and it's the direction that we're going to. It's a full immersion because you can imagine it. At the same time, I think it's also because we need to, how do I say it? We need to be,
Well, all right. But let me go to this other question that I want to ask that I think is very important for many of the people in this audience. How did you talked about the difference in launching a company now and in launching a company maybe even 20 years ago? How did you and are you marshaling social media for both the launch and as you grow the company?
Well, I mean, personally, social media, I started the brand at a pivotal moment. It was the fashion magazines were still very important when I launched, and in the 11 or 12 years that have passed, my first collection was Spring Summer 2012, the world changed completely, and the way we communicate and the way we buy product and the way we see product, and for me, it was key. I remember being at a conference and meeting Kevin from Instagram and hearing him speak, and I remember thinking it really was the same moment that we were launching our brand, and we initially thought, okay, we're going to focus in the US market, and then from there we're going to go to other things. And it wasn't the case, because being in social media, having certain people, it was the beginning of street style. Some girls started wearing our shoes and it exploded, so suddenly stores from all over the world wanted to buy the brand. And the brand became immediately global, and the world became an oyster. And now you don't need to wait like maybe 20 years ago that you would be famous in one market and then have to go to another market. Now, if something's hot, everybody wants it. So the right woman wears it, she gets photographed, and the next day you have 1,000 emails from the whole world, and they want this shoe, this bag, this dress. And so it's an incredible tool, and it also helps young designers, because you used to have to be in Paris, Milan, London, or New York to be seen. And nowadays, through social media, you can get discovered from anywhere. And so it's an incredible tool. It's an incredible tool because it's the best marketing and that you can get. And if you have a singular voice and on your social media, if it's interesting, if it feels personal, and if you tell your story the right way, people will learn from it and will discover it and will love it, and then your brand will grow.
On that note, I would love to open the floor to questions. If anyone has a question for Edgardo. If not, I have plenty more. Yes, right here. Oh, and you come up next, please. I'm going to you first. Say the question. I'm going to repeat it. Oh, okay. Okay.
Hello. Okay. I wanted to ask Edgardo, so you mentioned briefly, indirectly, the decline of magazines, which, of course, I agree with, and the power of social media. So I'm curious to get your perspective on how can these brands stand out in social media, if that's the most important vehicle that you think exists today for marketing a brand such as yours, and how do you stand out from all the other brands that are also on social media, trying to grab that attention?
I think the most successful Instagrams, especially in the beginning, is when they're particularly personal. In I have to say, up until the first maybe 4 or 5 years of the brand, Aquazzura was my Instagram. It would be me and my journey. I would post what I found interesting. I would post the shoes. I would post me on holiday. And it felt that the customer was in you, in your journey, in your world. And that's the thing. If you want people to discover your world, you need to share your world. It can't feel corporate. It can't feel like a catalog. I think the most successful social media, especially in the beginning, if you see brands, other brands like Jacquemus, that again, another person who made their social media incredibly human, and he shared his story of the south of France. Like me, I shared my story, I shared my background, I shared my friends, I shared what the exhibitions that I found interesting, the women that I found interesting, and you could, if you could see my social media, you could immediately understand what the brand was about and who I was dressing and what I liked, and it was incredibly clear. And I think that is when it's really interesting.
And there's a question over here.
Yes. Hi, Edgardo. Thank you so much for all the information. My name is Daniela Uribe. You're actually my biggest idol because I am a luxury footwear designer, and there's a lot of things that connect me to you. I have a bachelor's degree in London College of Fashion of Footwear Design and Development at Cordwainers. I produce in Marche, but I actually just changed to a new factory in Tuscany. And I'm based here. So I launched my brand 2 years ago, and today, launching a footwear brand with a luxury price point where you're so close to such important people like you, it's pretty difficult to get, noticed, to really grow the belief that your shoes, are worth that price and that you produce in these places. And there's many routes to go, trade shows and showrooms and sales and agents. What is your one advice you give, someone like me who's coming in 2 years with a luxury footwear brand to get those retailers to really believe in your name? I live in Miami, but I obviously spend a lot of time in Italy and in London where my contacts are. So what would be your one advice for, somebody like me?
I personally think in the beginning and the point where you are, where you already have a collection, if you already have a collection, is to find the right people who have those contacts, and use them to your advantage, in the sense that what helped me, and it took me a while. I went through a couple of showrooms in Milan, and I was able to find. So in the beginning, it took me like 2 years to find the right showroom in Milan, and then I found the showroom in the US. And you need showrooms that have other brands, ideally, that buyers are coming for, and then intrinsically they'll see your things because they're coming to see other things as well. It's harder to be on your own because if a buyer doesn't have enough time, they won't necessarily go out of their way to just see you. But if you're with a group of brands and some of the brands are already in the stores where you would like to be, they're already visiting the showroom for those stores, and they'll have a chance to see your things along the way. It's going to be an easier sell, and if they find something interesting, they'll probably buy it or give you a chance, or you'll be able to speak and present your collection. So finding the right, and you still have good multi-brand showrooms, especially in Europe. You have some in London, you have some that show in both Paris and London, you have some in Paris, and you have some in Milan. It's finding the one that resonates more with you and that makes sense for you.
One more question. Anyone? Yeah, over here? Yes.
Thank you. Hi, Edgardo. Thank you for the information that you shared with us today. You started at a really young age, and you've also talked about having mentors and that relationship is key, right? So what advice would you give a young entrepreneur that is looking to build that relationships with mentors, or the power of networking? So how the networking has helped your career and launching your brand?
I mean, it really depends. I think a lot of the networking in the beginning was done. I met a lot of people actually through my school. If you're in most of these schools, most of the good schools will have good teachers who will have contacts in the industry, and if they see potential in you, they will connect you to the right places. You'll be able to have the right internships, and within some of these jobs, you'll be able to meet people. I think that's where you probably start. I don't know if I'm answering your question in that way, but Especially when I was in school, I was already working, but I also used school as a means to maybe have contacts that I didn't have. Teachers introduced me, teach me what I really, I went focused into what I wanted to get from the school, and you can get some of these connections in school, so it's very useful in that sense. Also, by working, I mean, during working within Europe and working in the industry, having the opportunity, you'll meet a lot of people, and that's the best time to network. I don't know if that answers your question.
Can we squeeze in one more question? Anyone? Well, I don't see do I see a hand? Okay, then I have one. Oh.
Hello, Bridget, and hello, Edgardo. Thank you so much for sharing this afternoon with all of us. I am Titina Pensini, journalist, designer, live in New York. I wanted to ask you, as a designer, what has been like the most challenging pair of shoes you have ever designed that took you so long to really like, wow, I did it?
That's a good question.
It sure is. It's fascinating.
The most challenging thing is when you think when you're doing well, or when you are trying to make a new collection, you always want to think, okay, I need to make the next iconic shoe or the next bestseller. But when you're designing, it doesn't really work that way. So that I think is a very hard thing. Trying to make something that comes naturally, but that can stand the test of time. I think, for me, good design is design that is timeless. Is something that's beautiful today, but if you open it in 5 or 10 years, it's still beautiful and it doesn't look dated. That, for me, is good design. And it's something that women and men like. That if you're wearing something, and I think when you're designing, having all these things in mind, it's really difficult. I don't necessarily have one specific shoe. I think maybe there were moments when, I got called to design the shoes for the wedding of the Duchess of Sussex, and designing her shoe was tough because I was kind of like, okay, the world is gonna see this shoe, so what am I gonna do? And it needs to be beautiful, and so but in general, I think it's more the other way. It's designing something that can transcend time and that can be eternally beautiful. Because for me, that is really luxury, something that really stands the test of time.
Edgardo, thank you so much, and thank you to all of you. It's been a pleasure.